This is the second part of Chapter 1, where we're going to be talking about the scientific process. The scientific process includes making observations, forming logical hypotheses, and testing them. You might remember learning the scientific method way back in maybe middle school or even high school as a 5-step method, usually starting with step 1, ask a question, and so forth. Well, not that that's completely incorrect, but the scientific process in actuality is not that simple. It's hard to say that it happens in 5 steps all the time in that order. In fact, the scientific process in reality is a bit more complex, perhaps even cyclical in nature. Sometimes it's hard to even pinpoint where it starts and where it ends. So, this is a representation of the true scientific process. At the center of science is forming and testing hypotheses. It's really the whole purpose is to collect information through our own exploration and discovery from the community and feedback that we get, and from thinking about how science can benefit society, like, for example, finding cures for diseases, making new inventions, or just for the love of gaining knowledge about the world. These are the reasons why somebody might pursue science, the scientific process, and begin forming and testing hypotheses. Notice that then, after those hypotheses are formed and tested, it can go back out to the exploration and discovery, the community analysis and feedback, the societal benefits and outcomes. So there's a constant, really, evolution of science and how that information is gathered, disseminated, and that can continue. As we make new discoveries, we have new questions. Sometimes even there are studies that find results that are kind of not the expected results, and those end up being discoveries that lead us to new cures and even new questions. So have an appreciation for the fact that the scientific process is not simple 5 steps, and I certainly wouldn't ask you to list those 5 steps and sequence them. Instead, I want you to be able to appreciate the scientific process and hopefully apply it to examples um, in our class whenever we can, especially in lab, and also through examples of studies that we talk about in this class where some of the information that we know today has come from. And one of those studies that I like to use as a model in this class is highlighted in this video that I'm going to ask you to watch. It's from Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and they have this video posted on YouTube. So you can go ahead and follow this link to YouTube. Make sure it's called Natural Selection in Humans. And I'd like you to watch this video for the next 14 minutes while you pause this video where I'm talking to you now, and then come on back and we'll have a little follow-up discussion about the video. Um, and it's a really interesting video. It gets into some relationships that relate to evolution in the human population, but we're not going to really focus on that aspect of this, but more so how the scientific process was used in that study. All right, so if you haven't yet, well, you shouldn't have because I was still talking. Go ahead and pause this video, go over to the other video, and then come back. Welcome back. So at this point, you should have watched the Howard Hughes Medical Institute video, and now we're ready to have a little bit of a follow-up discussion. So I want to start by asking you a couple questions to ponder, and we'll go over the answers together here. So the first question, as it relates to some of the concepts from Chapter 1, I want you to think about what type of data Dr. Allison collected in his study. Was it A, qualitative, B, quantitative, C, both qualitative and quantitative, or D, neither? All right, if you haven't made your selection yet, please go ahead and do so because I'm about to go over the answer. Dr. Allison collected both qualitative and quantitative data. So if you're not sure why or what qualifies as quantitative versus qualitative data, let's take a look first at the definitions and then apply that to Dr. Allison's study. Data is any kind of recorded observation. Data can be numerical. Data can be descriptive. Any type of measurements or numerical data would be qualified as quantitative data. So as shown here in the blue box, um, he was collecting the blood samples from the individuals in his study, and he took note of how many people had the sickle cell trait based on the shape of their red blood cells, whether they were sickle shaped or crescent shaped, or whether they were perfectly round. So saying that like 1 out of 15 people with the sickle cell trait develop malaria, versus 14 out of 15 people without the sickle cell trait develop malaria is quantitative data. Another example of quantitative data are the pie charts shown below. It's just a different way to represent the data, and specifically he was looking at the children, the blood of the children, where he saw that 28% of the children with the sickle cell trait also had the parasite that causes malaria, compared to 46% of the children without the sickle cell trait had the plasmodium parasite that causes malaria. So all of these at the top in the blue box are types of quantitative data. In contrast, qualitative data is descriptive. So, and sometimes we can derive the qualitative data from the quantitative data, but it depends on what you're depicting. So in the red box at the bottom, you can see Africa and different patterns and colors overlaying the continent, showing the presence of the parasite that causes malaria, the presence of the sickle cell trait, and places where those overlap or don't overlap, or where there was no data collected. So it's just a different story that's being told there, based on like a spatial representation over an area where those trends occur. So it's not that like one type of data is better than the other. It just really depends on the message that's trying to be transmitted and how that's depicted. Hopefully you now understand the difference between the two types of data, quantitative and qualitative, and you would be able to apply that to other examples besides the study by Dr. Allison. Let's take another look at a different application of the study related to Chapter 1 and some of the terminology that you need to be familiar with. Did Dr. Allison use inductive or deductive reasoning in the development of his hypothesis? Let's take a moment to ponder that and decide which one you think is correct. And if you've never heard these words before, my suggestion is you go ahead and just pause the video, look it up in your book, and then see if you can apply it. All right, time to go over the answer, and it is inductive reasoning. Well, what is inductive reasoning? And how is this an example of that? With inductive reasoning, a conclusion is drawn by looking for patterns in a large number of observations. So usually you begin with some data, and then you determine what general conclusions can be derived from those data. In other words, you determine what theory or theories could explain the data. So in the case of Dr. Allison's study, he was looking at the connection between sickle cell and malaria based on the blood samples and the prevalence of the plasmodium in the blood and the shape of the blood cells in the blood samples. Okay, and so how does this differ from deductive reasoning, where in deductive reasoning you use facts, rules, definitions, or properties to arrive at a conclusion? So usually you begin with some statements or premises, things that you assume to be true, and then you determine what else would have to be true if those premises are true. So there's an example I like to use for this that actually relates to my students in the class. So what I typically do is I ask how many credits each student has, how many college credits. Doesn't matter where you got them from, just how many college credits do you have? Doesn't have to be exact, but if you have a ballpark idea, 50, 30, 100. And then my other question would be, do you have an associate's degree? So right now I'm just collecting some data that I might use in the development of my hypothesis. So what I'm trying to get at is how many credits would a student need to get their associate's degree from Broward College? Let's specify the Associates of Science. So latest time I checked, to get an associate's degree at Broward College, a student must have 60 credits. Okay, let's just leave it at that. So that's the rule that you accept to be true. You need 60 credits to get your Associates of Science. So let's say Sally, a student named Sally, has more than 60 credits. Based on that rule, we would say that Sally therefore has an associate's degree from Broward College. But can you think of a case where that might not be might not be true? Maybe Sally has 60 credits from a different institution, from a different degree, and some of those credits can't be counted towards her associates at Broward College. I have more than 60 credits, but I don't have an associate's degree from Broward College. So one thing that this demonstrates is that sometimes hypotheses are falsifiable. The hypothesis would have been that to get an associate's degree at Broward College, a student must have 60 credits, and we can test that. That is testable and falsifiable. Two characteristics that a hypothesis must have. So I could go out and I could collect more data from every student in this class or all my classes, and probably we should go to other departments as well among the college and gather all that data, and I'm sure we'll find cases where the hypothesis was found to be false. And then what? Well, perhaps we have to go back and rephrase the question. So you can see how this might not lead to a theory, as shown in the diagram at the right. Sometimes these hypotheses that are tentative are found to be false and might cause us to circle back to the beginning and ask ourselves, well, was that really a good question? What could I do differently? Okay, well, that concludes the Chapter 1 lessons.